Hey guys, the following is my thoughts right when the credits rolled, basically, in Cyberpunk 2077, and it just went on for a very long time, so I figured I should upload it as its own podcast. But that's the context of this conversation with myself, is that the credits are rolling and I just finished the game, and I'm kind of just having my thoughts and review and trying to be complete, and it goes on for a while. So I didn't want to have like an hour-long podcast at the end of a video. So this game's complicated. It's not cut and dry as just being trash. Like, I was constantly frustrated with so many elements of it, but it's because I wanted it to be good, and it was from a company I expected to make a good game. And it isn't, it's just not a great game, but it's not trash. In particular, I would say it's probably better than Wasteland 3. Which was trash. That game, my god, that game might have been even more broken than this one, and I played them practically back to back. Like, this is not a good time for mainstream RPG releases in the Western style. Like, things are dire. Like, man, like I don't like them, but it really does pay to be a JRPG fan these days, it seems, because you are better served by at least the mainstream developers, because the Western they're really struggling to put out a single coherent functioning game that works in this style, and it's getting increasingly frustrating. But there's just so many things wrong with this game, and it's really apparent. Like, obviously there's the bugs, but the problem is that even beneath all those bugs is a deeply flawed game. And so it's kind of got that issue that I've had with a number of games where it's like people are like, yo, you should just be playing this later when the bugs are fixed. And I'm like, I don't think just fixing the bugs will resolve all the other issues I have with this game, like, which has been a thing that happens with a number of things like Wasteland 3 or Kingdom Come Deliverance or No Man's Sky and so on. It's like, there's, like, No Man's Sky is a little bit of a weird case because they changed the game so significantly, but I don't necessarily think that what it is now is something I would like, but it's definitely changed its basic DNA in a bunch of ways. Having no story and no main campaign makes that more possible, but all these games that have a main spine, like Wasteland 3 and this, it's like, there's only so much that will ever change. On a foundational level, the gameplay will be what it is, the story will be what it is, they might add a quest, or add a mechanic, or tweak some balancing, but foundationally, it's going to be this on a structural level, just without the crashes and T-posing and parts where you have to troubleshoot a quest because it's broken, which, having that happen in the main story is brutal. Like, this is the game where you pick an intro and then your intro immediately is irrelevant and never comes up again. Like, in my case, it informed my character and it made it feel like I started somewhere and then came back to that place, and it made the ending feel meaningful. I'm kind of concerned that other people might just get a less satisfying ending if they didn't pick Nomad to begin with, because it enables a kind of like full circle element, even if it's very token than it would be otherwise, where you kind of just, there's kind of like a fuck it nature with other, if you think about other narratives, but I haven't seen their intros, but they're not Nomads, so it's just like, you know what, Night City's fucked me enough, I'm just gonna leave. It's like there's just a fuck it nature to that, which isn't completely unearned, but with a Nomad it's like, it's, you know, stove hot. Like, I lived this way, tried this new thing, no, going back changed, and a new family, a new life, and all that, not just going straight back to the backers. The main story isn't, there's like, it's actually frustratingly uninteresting, and it really is just a matter of meeting a series of characters that you hopefully like, and then, oh, Lizzie Wizzy was just played by Grimes. I don't really know Grimes that well. I think she's a musician that's married to Elon Musk. That's it. But I think her music was in the version of the soundtrack that's censored if you play with the stuff switched so you can make video content. Like, the characters carry this, which is why it's a bit rough that the characters aren't, they're kind of a mixed bag. Because the main story is basically you go on this big heist and it goes bad, and then you get the chip and all that. All of that part of the narrative was actually pretty good. The setup with Jackie and T-Bug, and how the heist goes bad, and the escalation there. Like, that was all the highlight of the entire narrative for me, basically. But then the main story, just gone. Like, the moment you get woken up by Takamura and you finish your whole intro of like, oh, here's Johnny Silverhand, and like, the game gets worse when Johnny Silverhand's added to the game. And it's not the character's fault, that's just when the open world starts. Like, and like the non-linear, here's your three-pronged main story that you can approach in any order, and so on. The big bulky part, the open world problem of how this game could have had a focused narrative and could have had more focused mechanics, but then they wanted to be an open world because that's just what AAA games do these days, and it's what they're known for too, and it doesn't really serve almost any part of the game, especially since the open world has like no mechanical meaning and function. It's just a padding of space between all of your objectives, and it runs poorly and it makes the whole game worse. That's like, it's just this fucking like boulder that they're carrying on their back that just made the whole game so much harder to make unnecessarily. Like, they're almost working, it feels like they're operating out of habit, like it has to be open world because they're all open world. But once Johnny Silverhand's introduced to the narrative, it's just like, I don't know, you just kind of do these 3 separate main story campaigns, and then each of those 3 separate campaigns has a switch where it's like, you've reached the end of the part where this main story campaign is main story, but you can follow up with those characters to do their side content, because it feels cohesive. Like, there's no switch where you're like, now we're in the side content. Like, if you don't pay attention to the categorization of the quests, it feels like you're just naturally continuing their stories. It's just the fact that you've gone past the bare minimum for continuing the main story, and it's good because you should be invested in those characters, and that's like the point of a lot of that stuff. But the main story really is like, you get Johnny's in your head, and then you spin your wheels for a very long time, largely understanding that it's like, yep, you can't really just fix this Johnny in your head problem. Then there's a magic well spring underneath Arasaka Tower, and you need to get there to fix the Johnny problem. Like, shockingly little main story actually happens functionally between those points in the main plot. There's all the side plots of all the characters you meet, and there are mandatory plots with those characters along the way, but there's surprisingly little in service of the main story. And so like, it's just kind of frustrating because the intro is really good. Like how bad your plan is, how everyone's thinking this is going to be their big heist they're going to tire on. The characterization where like you kind of care about T-Bug and you really care about Jackie. He's one of the best characterized people in the game, and he's gone immediately, frustratingly. And then Dexter Deshawn, like that cast is interesting. Hey, his name's on the screen now. Those are all really interesting characters, except maybe T-Bug. T-Bug's not that interesting. She has relatively little screen time and all that, but you know, the back and forth between her, you, and Jackie largely worked, and it could have gone somewhere if she survived. Which is like, this works, like getting you invested in certain characters, then killing them off. Like there's a number of RPGs I've done that, where the intro gives you a party, and then everyone in that party dies at the end of like the first map. And if they do it right, you're invested in those characters, and it feels like this loss when they're gone. The question is whether you can replace them with a suitably like a suitable replacement of characters that are like the same level, and I'm like, did they though? I don't know if they did. Eventually, over the course of the game, you meet some characters that are pretty well developed and obviously get a lot more screen time than Jackie ever did and all that, but there's a frustration with the you kind of never have a crew again the same way you did at the beginning. And so you don't really have a main cast that's with you throughout the game. It's just you and Johnny Silverhand. And Johnny Silverhand also feels underserved. I discussed this earlier in the playthrough, but some people just come here at the end to just listen to me review a game during the credits sometimes. But like, Johnny Silverhand just should have done more and been more. He didn't have an especially strong or even coherent political like ideology. He's supposed to be this rebel, but he had surprisingly little specific to say. He was like an archetypical rebel, and that's it, which was its own kind of frustrating. But there's also just the fact that they set up the idea that he can take over your body, because he literally tries to kill you with your own body in your first encounter with him, and then immediately things get muddied because he just takes a backseat and you take over your body and you just play like normal, and Johnny Silverhand just becomes your imaginary friend, and he never ever does that again for the rest of the game up until the end. Like, you play for dozens of hours where the only symptoms of you having the relic in your head are that every now and then Johnny talks to you to be snide and dismissive but still vague and irritating, and then during a main story mission, without fail pretty much, during your main conversation, you'll have like relic malfunction detected and your vision gets blurry, and maybe he'll cough once or something. Or you'll, ah, shit! And like he'll play the same ah, shit voice line that he always plays. And it's like, that's the mechanical integration of that. Like, you don't have to like, there's no like Dead Rising 2 mechanic where you have to like keep acquiring and using these pills or something. Like, there's no trade-off. Like, Johnny taking over doesn't give you like certain stat bonuses. Like there's no like meter. Like, there should be like there could have been like a meter that you were navigating with pills, and like every time it gets low, Johnny certain stats maybe get better as a risk reward thing because Johnny's experience is kind of coming in, but you're also losing control, and you might like, maybe you'll even make like narrative choices against your will because he might do things that that you don't want him to do, and there's like a back and forth, like any kind of mechanic. And on some level, like, here's like, I feel like I've been spoiled, but like Breath of the Wild and Pathologic 2 just did such a good job at evolving the open world, and like in different ways. Breath of the Wild's not really an RPG, but it is like an open world game, and that's the thing that we're keep latching onto here. And then Pathologic 2 is absolutely an RPG, even if it doesn't have leveling up, which means shallow people can't tell that it's an RPG for some reason. But like Pathologic 2, in like Breath of the Wild would be a better example of how to make the world actually interesting, because the world is so fucking boring in this game on a mechanical level. It's barely interactive, and it's basically just a very expensive, game-ruining series of backgrounds to look at. And then Pathologic 2 is a good example of how to actually fucking implement your open world meaningfully into your narrative, especially when you're playing as a character who is sick and has those kinds of long-term problems to potentially navigate. But instead they just did nothing with those, so it's just a token narrative thing where you play as the generic badass that you always play in every open world RPG, and you just they kind of just nudge at the idea every now and then that you're totally dying or something, and it's just so disappointing, because instead of doing something interesting, they did nothing. And that's a constant thing, is like they kept doing the safe choice of just doing another open world game and not doing any particularly interesting choices along the way. And the things that work, and the things that they did do differently, were mostly baffling, half-baked, strange mechanics. Like you can walk around during almost every conversation in this game for some reason, but like you get locked in the conversation anyway, so you can't hit F to pick things up or interact with the environment, so you can't like multitask while the conversation's happening like a real person would. So I'm definitely wondering, like, why even let me? Because like, what's the trade-off? It's like you have shittier camera angles, you can't see everything correctly, people are often standing in like a circle around you, so you're whipping the camera around trying to look at who's talking, but you don't know who's going to talk in advance, so you're just kind of whipping after they start talking. You can't crouch, you can't interact, you're just a shittier camera. Like, we've had better cameras during conversations for decades at this point. Like, just go back to like even the reverse shot of like KOTOR 1 would just be a basic nod towards like, let's just like look at the people who are talking. And like, we customized a character. Wouldn't it be nice to see your customized character in cutscenes? You know, like Geralt. Like, you among other things, one of the like there's two things that help you get attached to Geralt in The Witcher 3. One is the obvious part, is obviously he's just a very well-written character that's beloved from a fantastic series of novels, and I've been poking at those, and it's just solid writing, and Geralt's just really one of the better characters that exist, period. But like, you also get to see him. He makes snide remarks, he makes faces, there's like he's got this sort of like deadpan to him that's really fucking funny a lot of the time, and he's a clever dude, and there's just like good characterization, not just in his voice, but his face. You get to see him react to things. In this game, we customize a character, and we have the Outer Worlds problem where you only see them in your inventory screen, and like, I think one cutscene in the entire game, the one at the end, and maybe the one at the beginning when I looked in a mirror. You can only see yourself in mirrors when you press the load mirror button, which is such a funny mechanic because like all you can, like I guess if you really want to make a face, you can do that. But like there's already a photo mode, so I don't know why the mirrors were so necessary anyway, because the mirror is just like a slower version of you pressing the inventory button and just looking at your inventory screen to see your character. But like, it's the Outer Worlds problem where I customize this character and I spend all this time making a guy that I want to play as, and then it's like you're never going to see him a single time because that game was also just an entirely first-person game where not even conversations would show your character. So it's like, why did I customize a character just to like gesture vaguely at the idea that I customize somebody? Like, at least in Elder Scrolls games you can play in third person if you want to, so you can run around in third person to see your character in the world a bit whenever you feel like it, even if it's generally preferred to play in first person. But like, I only saw my back when I was on a motorcycle, and that was when I was glitching out and not even showing my character correctly because I would be a weird bald person, and so like that doesn't even really replace my guy. It's what a weird choice. But yeah, the Paralysis narrative was more interesting than what's happening in the main story at that point. So like I wanted to follow up on that, and it just fucking stops midway through the stream, and you're like, okay. The ambiguity is kind of fun. Like, you don't really know the ending. You don't really know what's up. Like, he suspects the wife just like I did at one point, and it's unclear really if he's just being paranoid or not. There's also ambiguity of whether or not V survives, because they're like, I don't know, it's the Cyberpunk universe, maybe we can figure this out. Hell, they leave it open enough that they could literally make a sequel where you play as V again if they want to, especially with the Nomad ending, and like they could just have another narrative play out in the next 6 months. Like, he's not going to be, it's going to take him a while to die, but he is already getting, it is pretty rough that right out the gate he immediately is bleeding and suffering from not the same symptoms, but definitely his own symptoms. Like, he doesn't have like the weird glitchy effects anymore, but he's got like, he's bleeding out of his face in some way. I have to say in some way, because, you know, we can't see his face. So in those cutscenes, he's like, you're bleeding. I don't know, mouth, nose, eyes. That'd be horrifying, but who knows? Ears. There's all sorts of different holes people bleed from sometimes when they have a brain injury. Judy was kind of like an interesting introspection on like the hollowness of revenge. Pan Am has the most coherent narrative arc overall and gets the most screen time in general, I think. River has a bit going on. He's a decently developed character. Wasn't particularly attached to River or even It often felt like there was an obstacle between me getting particularly attached to most of the characters, but a lot of the cast, once again, has the Outer Worlds problem. Not the same one as I said before, but another Outer Worlds problem, and kind of like the Pillars of Eternity problem, where you have this big, long game, and so you would think that you'd have a lot more development and screen time with some of these characters, but a lot of them had surprisingly little to them. Like, I often think about, like, the dwarf hunter in Pillars of Eternity, which you meet her and she has this really interesting backstory about why she's here and what she's up to and what her culture's like and so on, and then she kind of stops talking for the entire game until she might have one or two, she might have like a little reaction here and there, but like not much of like a lot going on necessarily. And then there's like the one loyalty mission with her where you kind of like resolve the thing that she was like here to do, and then she goes back to silently following you around again, and you know, I'm just like, I don't know, I like character driven stuff, and so I kind of can be frustrated when I'm spending so much time with characters and there's just not that much to them, and so I can't help but think about like that with a lot of the characters. Like, they introduce like Mama Wells and Misty and Victor and a bunch of these other characters that aren't like the big three most developed characters, and they're just like, there's not that much to them, and they're kind of don't carry the game. There's a, I don't know. I don't really know how to, I don't know how to write characters. I don't know like what makes them especially memorable and attached to you necessarily. Like it's hard to articulate exactly what it amounts to, but there was definitely an element in Witcher 3 of how like there was all these magnetic personalities and these people that you just wanted to see more of, and I don't know if any of the characters in this game necessarily reached that level. It was more like, let's do the next quest because it's the next quest. And it's like, oh, that person's here. Yeah, they're all right. And for like, there's like a couple characters that I'm like, that I kind of knew, or and I'm like, yeah, that guy, yeah, they're kind of likable or whatever. But it's not like, what's gonna happen next with Yennefer in this game and stuff like that, or like these characters in Witcher 3 that you, like whenever they showed up again, you're like, oh fuck, it's them, and you're like, and they'd have all these like nuanced performances about with involving their complicated motivations and their personalities, and you just like are just eating the stuff up. In general, it's just like the one way or another, the like when I played Witcher 3 and when I played Thronebreaker, I was just eating them up, and I could not get enough of those games, and I don't think I ever burned out or was like, okay, when is this going to end? I think at some point in Witcher 3 I might have marveled at how long I'd been playing, because it was like 150 episodes or something, or maybe even more than 200 by the end of the DLCs, where like I was like, my god, this is a incredibly long playthrough, but I also just kind of want to keep going. Like there are games out there that I want to keep going with, like Breath of the Wild and Witcher 3, and this game just did not accomplish that, and that's, I guess, the most collective criticism of all of it as a package. And like that's just wasn't there. I can look at individual elements and be like, that part's nice and that part's nice, and then look at other parts and say that part's shit and that part's shit, and it's hard to say why one works and the other one doesn't, because like Witcher 3 didn't have the most deep combat. I was about to talk about how like this game, just the combat just wasn't very interesting. You fight humans basically the entire game, and you just shoot them, and they all behave roughly the same. There's a handful of cyber psychos that go into ninja mode, but like almost everyone in this entire game is basically the same enemy repeating over and over again without much variety. But also your ways of dealing with them aren't particularly appealing. You just shoot them with a variety of guns, but they're not like it doesn't feel like a proper shooter. Like when I play Doom or Halo, every gun has a particular function and feel, and you flow between them all, and everything has a purpose, and like everything feels powerful when used correctly and so on. But like, because this is like a looter shooter, it's got the Borderlands problem of just like, I don't know, there's a bunch of fucking guns with colored names and random stats, and just shoot the health bar a lot and make it go down. And so like everyone kind of just stands around and gets shot, or they take cover periodically, and like there's a lack of like the movement's not that interesting. Like all the characters, like even if you run around like crazy, the enemies aren't gonna like behave like they're characters in a shooter. It's not like in Halo, the Covenant all move differently and behave differently, and they work together in a variety of ways, and they interact with the environment, and so it's a big, dynamic, interesting battle. And that's the thing about RPGs, is that being an RPG is inherently a genreless genre. Like it's just about whether or not you can roleplay, which means like you can make meaningful choices with your character, and like not just level up and customize them, but specifically like drive their story and, you know, play a role. And snide people would be like, well, you can play a role in Mario. And it's like, that's a willful misinterpretation, and it's stupid. Try to keep up. But that story interaction and that characterization and those behaviors, like that's what makes an RPG an RPG. A simple one will just have dialogue choices, but a more ambitious one will let you interact in a gameplay way, like I can just shoot this character that's important to the story and stuff like that, and the story has to react to that. But like that is the RPG part, is that those branching stories and those checks and things, and the more complicated and interesting they can make that, the better. But in addition to that, RPGs generally insist on having combat, and then that combat is just basically going to be another genre. Like you can have an RTS RPG, you can have a card game RPG, which was the last game. You can have a third-person action adventure RPG, which is one of the most common versions. But then you have a shooter RPG like this one, and what sucks is that many shooter RPGs, their solution is just to be a bad shooter. I hate Borderlands and a lot of the looter shooters out there and so on, because they're just like trying to, those games in general are just trying to be Diablo but a shooter, and Diablo 2 is just like this infinite mindless grind, or especially Diablo 3 is just like this, like just keep clicking forever and the numbers keep going up, and then you keep clicking and it's like it's just designed to keep you playing forever and just like numbers for numbers sake. And like the gameplay gets diluted in many of those, diluted, not diluted in many of those cases. And it's like you can, your RPG that is a shooter is allowed to be a good shooter. It doesn't have to be a shitty, monotonous, diluted shooter where all that matters is stats and crafting and making your numbers the goodiest so that you can shoot the guy with gooder and so on, and then some hyper convoluted skill tree that's mostly just a bunch of percentage increases that almost never give you a new ability, but instead just slowly keep kicking the rock further down the road of being better at the one action you're performing the whole game that is not necessarily meaningfully different from the beginning of the game to the end of the game, but instead just you just shoot them with numbers, and the numbers are numberier, and it's just a race. Like, can you keep your numbers ahead of the enemy's numbers? Because they're going to go up slowly, so you better keep ahead of their numbers, or the game's going to get harder, I guess. It leads to a paradox where, funnily enough, normal shooters are better at simulating progression than RPGs are. Like, I'm playing Half-Life Alyx right now, and over the course of the game, I get it. I keep, like, you get a gun and you really spend time with that gun, and then eventually you get a new gun and that has new purposes and new things it opens up to you, and then you maybe can upgrade that gun. And that's like the basic arc of like Halo and Half-Life 2 and Half-Life Alyx and Doom 2016 and so on, is that you start off with this gun and you're like, okay, this is the things this can do, and here's the solutions I can solve with this gun, and blah blah blah. Here's my new gun. Oh, this changes things, and here's new enemies. Oh, this changes things. And like, that's progression. That's a power ramp. That's me feeling like I'm getting stronger, but also the enemies are getting stronger, and it's all meaningful on a mechanical level. This is fucking lazy. This fucking looter shooter genre, where it's just you fight the same enemies with the same guns the whole game, but your guns get numberier and they get numberier, and you have to do a bunch of irritating inventory management just to keep up with the fucking race of making your numbers more numberier. But like, mechanically the game's not doing anything. You're just on a treadmill the whole game. Like, why did we settle for this? Why are we like this? I guess I'm not, I guess, because I'm sitting here complaining about it, but like, why does this satisfy people? I guess this is the fucking, like, Genshin Impact audience. I don't know. Oops, I said Genshin Impact. There's so many good shooters that I don't really think it's fitting to be a shitty shooter anymore. That we should want more from our RPGs than that. And for that matter, this game, there's the Deus Ex. Deus Ex is hovering over this game as a specter the entire time, because it's just the most obvious comparison, because it's a stealth action hybrid shooter in the Cyberpunk universe, or a Cyberpunk, I shouldn't say the Cyberpunk universe, because Deus Ex is its own universe, and I think this game is the officially licensed the Cyberpunk. I think Johnny Silverhand might be like a real figure in the Cyberpunk mythos or something, like that kind of stuff. Like some of these characters meant something to somebody when they went into this game, but for me, I have no context, so I don't have a reason to know which ones are like the real, because I think this is licensed from the Cyberpunk tabletop universe, maybe, or something. I don't know, because there's not, obviously there isn't a Cyberpunk. There's like, when you say the Cyberpunk, there probably is like the one official license that gets the name Cyberpunk, but there are so many Cyberpunk universes that they're just all over the place. Philip K. Dick, T.S. Eliot, because they had a bunch of like quotes from books, right? Like, the balancing was out the fucking window in this game. There's the issue where like at the beginning of the game it's hilariously difficult. Like stuff is just you're so useless at the beginning of the game, but almost immediately you become massively overpowered and never have a problem again. So that quickly goes away. So you spend the majority of the playthrough just destroying everything. And you could be like, well, at the beginning V's new at this. No, he's not. V's been doing this for 6 months. And he was in the backers before that. Like he was a Nomad for years, and then he was in Night City with Jackie for months, and he's like somehow a sad little baby boy at the beginning of the game that can barely fend for himself, and then by the end of the game he's hilariously overpowered in every possible way and just a nightmare. And it's just like, why did he? I can see the argument already. It's like it's gonna be like, it's because he's being overwritten by Johnny Silverhand, and Johnny Silverhand's such a cool boy. So over the course of like 2 to 4 weeks, which is like it's the vague window the game takes place in, probably, he gets more combat experience and more effective than he ever was in like the last 10 years of being somebody who was already running around and shooting people and fighting and so on. I don't know. Just it's hard to buy that he's so useless at the beginning, and then he's immediately ramped so hard. But it's also like a weird balancing issue of like why, like what is the intended difficulty level of this game? Because I feel like I never got a coherent idea of how difficult the game wanted to be, because it was all over the place from every moment to moment. I don't know. I just so disappointing. People will be like, you just wanted to, there's the inevitable like you're just nitpicking, or you wanted this game to be bad, or you wanted to hate it. It's like, yeah, you're right. I fucking carefully planned my schedule for all of 2020 around playing this game immediately on launch day because I hated it and wanted it to fail. That was totally my plan. I could have just not played it. That's what I do when I think a game's gonna be bad. You know that, right? Like I don't intentionally play bad games, except for when it's like a funny thing. Like I'll play like a Sonic game or an Alone in the Dark 2008 type game with a friend when I know it's gonna be bad, or Y2K, because I gotta see it and experience it. But like this wasn't like fun. Like this wasn't bad and fun. Well, occasionally the glitches were pretty funny. But like, this wasn't one of those fucking incredible, wacky adventures like playing Sonic 06 with a friend. Like this was not the goal of this playthrough. I was actually anticipating this game, or at least I wanted it to be good. I don't really get hyped for games anymore. I've been burned too many times in the past, like Mass Effect Andromeda, but even before that, a lot of other cases for a long time, just being disappointed. And so like I cut through the hype in a lot of cases, and I just call shit out, and I can be frustratingly right, I guess, and I don't want to be, but I am. Like No Man's Sky, right before it came out, I called out all of the problems it was going to have, including the fact that it wasn't going to have multiplayer, despite everyone thinking it was going to have multiplayer, and how like the basic problem with exploring is that like when you explore in a video game, you're exploring a crafted level. Like you explore Legend of Zelda, you explore Dark Souls, because like you have this big crazy environment that's beautiful and has all these different places you can go, and there's a main path for steamrolling through, but there's all these little nooks and crannies and cool secrets you can discover. And like Souls games always go like 12 layers deep of like there's like entire hidden covenants and NPC quest lines that you can only find by really looking around and exploring and really double backing and like trying to figure that out and so on. Like there's rewards for exploring, but the exploring comes from the fact that it's like a handcrafted thing designed to be explored. And so I'm like, how interesting can No Man's Sky possibly be to explore when all these planets are just going to be fucking balls of clay with random points just speckled all over them, and like the entire planet's going to be basically the same like geography and climate and plant life and animals, and no one made them by hand because they're procedurally generated. So you're just gonna like, I don't know, do you want copper? Just go east until copper happens, if this is a planet that has copper on it, and you'll find some copper, and then just you scan and run to the nearest waypoint that says the thing you want, and then you run to the waypoint that takes you back to your ship or your base or whatever, and you just like, the map's practically meaningless. It's just a series of randomly generated nodes, and you're not really exploring in any real way aside from the immediate starting image of just getting to a new planet and be like, whoa, look at that ball. Look what it looks like. And then that after 30 seconds that wears off again, and you go back to the gameplay loop of just running around to randomly generated nodes that don't really involve any meaningful exploration because there's nothing special to discover. Like there's always that element of like, wow, I'm the only person to ever see this, which is cool, but like it's not, you're not seeing something that's necessarily worth seeing. And so I did this whole breakdown of that shit before the game came out, and then lo and behold, it's like, ah, fuck, here it goes. And so my primary concerns, if you go, like, I think this was like a Patreon Q&A like a year or two ago. I discussed this game and how like it's going to be frustrating. Like, because like on one level I was like, I don't think I trust them to actually engage with the themes of this setting in a particularly engaging way and make it really interesting and challenging, and like, oh man, the moral dilemmas here, and what would you do in this situation, and wow, the cyberpunk universe sure is fucked up, and all these other things, or like commentary on reality and real life politics and capitalism, or just anything, like just do something with it. And I was mostly right about that. Like they just don't go that far with it. There's occasionally a story that could only be told in this setting mechanically, but in many cases they just set up an idea like dolls and cyber psychos, and then it kind of just sits there, and the narrative might interact with it a little bit, like once or twice, but it's mostly just an idea that sits there. The only idea that they really follow through with is the idea that you have Johnny Silverhand taking over your mind, which itself, as I said before, is like really undercooked because he's not like wresting control from you throughout the game. And what the fuck's up with the pills? Like suddenly the pills show up at the end of the game like they were all there all along, and it's like, we never used these pills ever. We've never talked about this. Was this supposed to be a gameplay mechanic or a narrative mechanic in this game that was supposed to be happening throughout it, and you like didn't implement it because this game's not done? Because that's a bummer. Because out of nowhere at the end of the game, they completely rewrite, maybe even multiple times, how the mechanics work of Johnny being in your brain. Like, were these suicide pills? No, they're actually just let Johnny take over pills now. Is that what they're doing now? But now there's also an anti-Johnny pill. I could have had anti-Johnny pills this entire time. Was that also not a gameplay mechanic? Why wasn't that a gameplay mechanic? But yeah, like Johnny being in your head and having in your way that could only be done in this setting. At least, like, it wouldn't be done in like a... Like if this was set in modern day, that wouldn't happen, is what I mean. Like it requires the technology at least. Like that's the one mechanic that sticks to the main story. The fact that everyone's around me is modded almost never matters. There isn't really much transhumanism or body horror going on that much throughout it, and so on. So like the setting is just kind of like a backdrop. It's like a cosmetic thing almost. Like it's underutilized. Whereas the Witcher setting, like, it's a bummer because the Witcher is so tied to its setting and its mechanics, and this one just doesn't do that much with that. The other thing I discussed is that like I was bummed out that it was going to be an open world game, because to some extent you can get away with that in a third-person action game. Like a third-person action game being open world, it's like, okay, the level design's not that interesting a lot of the time, but Geralt doesn't necessarily interact with the environment in that much of an interesting way and doesn't seem to necessarily always need to. The thing is that when you get to a place, you're going to discover something crazy, because like this one's going to be like, here's a witch, here's a ghost that's haunting a well, and here's the unique mechanics that you deal with that, because you have to like enter the be able to fight ghosts mode and prepare and so on. And here's a clearing that's being attacked by a dragon or a griffin or someone, and here's a pack of zombies or whatnot, or the neckers and things. Like those are all different enemies that behave differently, and so like it leads to a situation, and like they're aesthetically different, they're thematically different, and their environments are different. So while the gameplay was relatively not that interesting in Witcher 3, like the combat, there just wasn't that much to it. Exploring was more rewarding because you just had so many things you could encounter. You could encounter an entire fully voiced and fully scripted multi-stage quest chain on accident, on a whim. Like how late in the game, or even post-game, I just randomly got like arrested and I'm like, what is this entire storyline? But also just wandering around doing all these filler nodes, the gigs, like it was just more rewarding in that setting because there was so much setting specific stuff just everywhere. And even if the encounters weren't massively deep, it was like, oh fuck, we're doing a lesson today. I did a necker yesterday, and then the day before that was like a bandit camp. Like it was just a different experience. There was so much more variety in that pool. In this game, you either stealth past or fight humans with guns. And like a couple times there's a drone or a robot. But basically just humans with guns. Like the setting has way less variety. And so what you really need to pull up on is just having really, really carefully designed and interesting levels. And so like if you Deus Ex it, like yeah, you can have like these really carefully crafted maps. There's a handful of them, and like that's the game. But you pour all of your love into making these really interesting maps in that way. Your Deus Ex, your Prey, your Dishonored. Like these games are games that I will go back, like I would gladly go back to one day and play them again because they were good campaigns. Even Human Revolution. I mean, even Mankind Divided had more going on, even if it has its own disappointing elements. Although its hub world was pretty fun to explore in its denseness. Denseness is good. You don't have to have a massive sprawling world that's empty and then all of your resources go into that and your whole game is hobbled. But in particular, there's an element of just shit sitting in a field. Like I was worried because in Witcher 3, shit just sits in a field and you just walk up to it and there's just nodes on a map. So it's kind of the Far Cry 4 and 5 problem where it's like the whole game is a series of camps that you go attack. Go attack those camps. And it's like, technically each one of them has its own layout, I guess. But like they all blend together immediately. You go to the camp, you shoot all the dudes, you maybe disable the alarm so they can't call more dudes. And there's a little bit of a playground there, like you can like try to get a bear to attack them or light something on fire, but like the camps themselves, despite having different layouts each time, just functionally they don't feel like an interesting, unique, memorable experience. Like I don't have a memory of each one in the way that I would a level of like Deus Ex or Dark Souls or so on. But like if it was going to be a lack of enemy variety and a more restrictive setting on that level, it really seemed like what they needed to do was go the Deus Ex path and have really carefully crafted maps and have really good stealth levels like Thief and Prey and so on. Like just and yeah, stealth action, like you can do them either way, but like have them designed to be played in those ways and really carefully make those levels, which admittedly I don't think CD Projekt Red has any history of really having carefully crafted levels that are interesting to play through on a mechanical level. They just kind of just do this. This is an open world map is just their default, and I don't know if it's in their skill set to do other than that. But the moment that this was going to be a first person Cyberpunk game with stealth, I'm like this kind of has to be a particular genre of combat and exploration, or it's just going to be a kind of sludge of content. But they I don't know if they didn't think about this, or because they just see this as their default formula, or if they just couldn't do it, or who knows what. But who knows what their trajectory was with this game. But they seem to have just been like, let's just do Witcher 3 again, even though we've changed the setting and the characters and the gameplay mechanics and the perspective even. They still tried to do a Witcher 3 map, and then lo and behold, that gig spam, those like interesting nodes that were everywhere on Witcher 3 just don't hit the same when the map isn't the same kind of fantastical and the enemies aren't the same kind of varied and so on. Like it's just not, it doesn't amount to much. So the gigs just blurred together to me. It's like there's a building, there's a guy in the building to shoot, or you have to shoot all the guys in the building, or you have to get a computer in the building. And like it became so automated that I could barely even remember what I was doing the moment. Like by the end of an episode, I'd be like, wow, I just did another hour. There I went. And I'd be like, what did I do this hour? What did I do today? I don't remember. Like this game just goes through you like wind whenever you're doing side content. Like the majority of the content, side content, not the main story side content. It's hard to qualify, but like the side stories with main characters obviously have more to them, but only on a narrative level. Almost always, mechanically they just don't, and even map wise, they almost never actually have that much more going on. If you're lucky, you'll eventually see a new setting. Like when I was with Pan Am and we went into a tunnel, there's this weird little like facility in a tunnel, and I'm like, this came out of nowhere. What's this new place? Whoa! Like occasionally you get to see something new, but a lot of it's just flows through you, and it's just a bummer. I don't know. We'll see if this if they make a sequel or DLC, and if they learn from any of their mistakes or whatnot. I'll probably play the DLC if they make one, or expansions, as they did for the last game they made. But that game was a much more unmitigated success than this one was. Although this game seems to have sold well, but their stock dropped, and obviously lots of backlash. I've been talking continuously for too long, so I need some water. But no, this was I don't know. This is not how I wanted this to go. As much as people will like sometimes demonize me as like an antagonist to them because they're like in ultra fanboy mode, and I'm the bad guy for criticizing something. It's like things deserve criticism in many cases. Like my approval and enjoyment and enthusiasm are a thing you earn. And like that's just what, like that's having taste. Like, and they've earned it twice. Like before this game came out, this was one of those companies that I'm like, I don't know, maybe they're like a do no wrong company like BioWare and Supergiant Games, and that list has not aged well. Now that list is like Supergiant Games and Lucas Pope, because I don't, after Mass Effect Andromeda and Cyberpunk 2077, I'm like, they're not a company that just wins by default. They're when they have a particular thing that I liked, and when they make other stuff, they might not pull it off, and it might not go so hot, and that's a bummer. Which people are allowed to fail, but that doesn't mean you could. Obviously, you still criticize things. That's just weird. This weird take. Somebody was like weirdly remarking in the comments like, this is how BioWare ended up how they are now because of this. Like on my, like saying that on one of my videos, like me criticizing a company is gonna ruin it, and like BioWare got PTSD and everyone quit after the Mass Effect 3 ending. It's like okay. Like, obviously, if people send death threats and harass people, like, that's bad. But if something comes out that's bad, criticizing the thing that's bad is not in any way a bad thing. And you can't blame the fate of the company on the fact that people didn't like a thing and they criticized it. Like, it's one thing if people completely overstep their bounds and behave in a way that they should never behave. Like, that's never okay. I ban people from my own channel constantly because they speak to me in a way that is an unreasonable way to speak to another person, and there is a zero warning, one strike thing where if you completely disrespect me and say something incredibly rude or insulting, and that's well beyond the bounds of what you'd ever say to someone's face, then you don't get a response, you don't get a warning, you just get immediately banned, and you'll probably never know you were banned because it's a shadow ban, and I don't give a shit, fuck you. Like, that's just, the internet sucks, and people treat each other like shit, and I'm absolutely willing to ban anyone who does that because they make my life worse, and letting them continue to comment on every video would just be them, just like, it's like some self-hating bullshit where I just let people like make my day worse on a daily basis. And it's like, no, fuck them, get out, bye. No appeals. There's no judicial appeal system here. You're out, goodbye. It's this comment sections are too low stakes. This is not like a right. You don't like, you're not owed this space. You can fuck off the moment I decide you can fuck off, and I don't care if it's unfair, because it's my comment section and I have to live here. It's my job. It's that simple. So yeah, like, I understand people are trash, but no, I'm not going to accept the idea that it's somehow immoral to criticize a game. That's a fucking gonk brain take, brah. Choom, bro, choomer. Unacceptable, stupid thought. No. And if you can't get the nuance between death threats and criticism, then it's kind of on you. Like, I don't know how the fuck to fix that for you. That's an incredibly bizarre thing. Because yeah, like this fucking weird fanboy nonsense where you just like you divide the internet, you divide stuff into teams, and you have to like fight for Cyberpunk because you've decided you like CD Projekt Red, so you have to like champion the game and fight anybody who disagrees with you about the game. Is just like, the fuck? No, what who's this for? The company's never gonna love you back, and the company deserves to be under fire to some extent for this. The right people should get blamed for it, and they never will, unfortunately. But yeah, like, it's the people who ran this project mismanaged it. That's basically always the case. Like, games where the people working on it, like, that are in the trenches, make mistakes, have significantly less major problems. Games that have major game spanning problems, like Mass Effect Andromeda and Cyberpunk 2077 and Wasteland 3 and No Man's Sky at launch, when games have those massive of problems and massive miscommunications and massive, like, you thought you were getting this game but you actually got this game, and like in many cases lies, like, or you know, Peter Molyneux, that's management problems. That's the people at the top fucking everyone. And like, I've worked retail and I currently work with YouTube, so like, I get it. I've worked at Best Buy while the people managing it that never work in the actual location are just running into the ground. I hear constant horror stories from Stephanie from her job about how like her company is just ran like ass, and it's just a constant horror story of like how the people that are never in the building that run the overall corporation fuck everything, but also the management in her building fuck everything, and it's just makes life hell for all the employees all the time. And like, YouTube is this bizarre top-down nightmare where like the people that run the whole thing are just like unaccountable to any of the people that actually make the content on this channel, on this website, and like, they make sweeping choices that fuck everybody, and we never have a say, and so on like that. Like, I get it. Like, yeah, the right people should take the blame, but the idea that criticism is unwarranted or should not be said for any reason is just fucking stupid. That's the thing, is I don't send harassing emails to anyone, or I don't even tweet my videos of criticizing games at the developers or anything. I just make content passively that people choose to watch. And like, if someone wants to like watch a video of me criticizing their game, then that's their right, and that's their choice, and that's their own behavior. Maybe it's a self-destructive cycle of insisting on going through content that they don't want to go through, but they can't look away for some reason. But maybe they find it entertaining. And in many cases, the criticism is valuable. I have had a lot of developers, indie obviously, I don't exist to AAA developers usually, although Brian Fargo shared my Wasteland 2 playthrough, and that was weird. But indie developers often watch my stuff and they learn things in the process. Things that they did well, things that they did poorly, they apply it to future projects. They thank me for the thing. I've gotten these big letters in the past about this stuff. Like, this is valuable feedback in many cases about what's going on, and also just like where they're also like using us as playtesters in many cases. Like, they watching people play the game on streams and so on is often useful feedback. Like if you watch the No Clip documentary about Hades, you can watch the developers of Hades watching live streams of their own game. Like they'll put out a patch for the game in the early access period, and then they'll watch the streamers play their game and see exactly, like they get instant feedback just like that. Like they have like it's like they're outsourcing their playtesting and stuff. Like this stuff, like what I do serves a purpose. And so like that only further emboldens me to be like, no, this is what I do is fine. This is warranted. I'm not fucking flawless. This isn't like a carefully researched thing where I play the game 4 times through, then taking notes every time and revise and edit it and like write a review and like a video essay and all that. Like this is my live commentary, and I can be wrong about a mechanic or be wrong about a story beat, and I completely accept that. And anybody watching this should understand that they should have a basic, like just the most basic literacy of what kind of media they're watching and what it means versus other kinds of media, and how different things are made differently and mean different things. And the developers are generally sophisticated enough to know that, even if the viewership of, in many cases, irritating fanboys don't get that kind of stuff. Like there's nuances here. This has been a long little podcast at the end, huh? You got me fresh in the morning because I started a new day because I thought there was more game. It sounded like we were starting a mission, but it was actually just us driving to the ending. Whoops. God. But yeah, I don't think this game's savable to some people, but I don't know if it's savable for me. It can hit a level of being playable, but it's never going to become great, I don't think, in my eyes, and that's a bummer. Not unless they massively overhaul the game, including large chunks of its narrative and gameplay, which I don't see that happening. Generally speaking, like as much as people will be like, you should have played this game 1 or 2 years later, like generally speaking, when you play a game later, you get the same experience, but a few little balancing tweaks that make it run a little smoother, and then like maybe most of the bugs are gone. But like fundamentally, deep down, it's pretty much the same game, almost always. And like I look at this and I can see through the bugs and some of the balance problems and see what the game is just as a concept in its execution. And it's just, I don't think it's a great game. It's not I don't think it's an especially strong RPG, and it's not an especially strong like action game either. And to some extent there's the fact that they use the Witcher 3 dialogue system, which is very limited and doesn't usually offer that much role playing. But that was because in Witcher 3, Geralt was such a fixed character for the most part, and you're kind of playing him, and you still can make meaningful choices along the way and do a bunch of cool stuff, but it still wasn't like you never had full control in the way that you would in some other games. Like you couldn't totally go crazy with it because he was still Geralt. But the story was so captivating and the characters were so well drawn that you didn't necessarily care. But here, when neither of those things are quite as true, it's a little rougher to come around to that. Like you can see the bones here, like how there's side content that affects the main content eventually. Like I did an ending that I could only do if I did that whole quest chain. I have no illusions. Like if I had just done what I needed with Pan Am and then moved on, obviously I wouldn't be joining the Aldecaldos. I'd barely know who the Aldecaldos were, because I would have barely interacted with them. And so that my endings would have been do Johnny Silverhand's plot or do the Arasaka plot, and those would have been the things. And so like that is a payoff in a way, but like I can't help but think back to like the Red Baron or the Bloody Baron or whatever from Witcher 3, the first major story arc after you get out of the little tutorial area, and like you have like the little fetus monster, you've got the 3 witches, you got the monster, you got the tree spirit, you've got the Baron himself, you have all these different. Was it his sister or his wife? I mean, was it his daughter or his wife? There's more and more character elements in there. Like you had a bunch of different parallel storylines that were mostly side content that all fed into this one setting and made this one setting feel more rich and kept adding new dimensions to this main story, so that when you did then go and finish the main story element of that area, suddenly all those things that you were interacting with all started coming into play in different ways, and they would have gone differently if you made different choices during those quests, or if you didn't do those quests at all, because those quests weren't mandatory in many cases. And like and how that all came together into one big crescendo, like that was the big, for many people, that was the big highlight of all of Witcher 3, was actually the first, what was kind of like Act 1 or whatever however that's denoted. But there were different variations of that too. Like I think there was like, was it the Landsmeet, I think, in Skellige? There was like, we're all building up to this big event, but you can also interact with all the different characters and do a bunch of side quests throughout that area, and that both colors and even changes the outcome of stuff, some of the stuff there, and changes the story, and it all builds together. This game didn't really have like nodes that all built together into a coherent way, and then like a big final story that it all paid off all the stuff that was happening. Like the side content with your various main-ish characters kind of just felt just like side content, like just kind of like it kind of happens in a vacuum, and then it gets paid off by the end, mainly just in the form of like, hey V, here's my voicemail, like that we just saw. Like that's kind of what we got in many of these cases. Like there just wasn't necessarily more they just kind of regressed. Yeah, this is a bummer. They also seem to repeat the mistakes of Deus Ex, funnily enough, Human Revolution, before the director's cut, because that game was like, you can be stealth or you can be action, but also here's some boss fights that you have to fight, and it completely breaks the game. And it's like, because they were outsourced to a different studio and they weren't coherent with the rest of the game structure, and they, in the director's cut, they added like stealth hacking solutions to those boss fights so they were more bearable. This game totally lets you go wherever you want with your trees and your skills, but also your stealth hacker is suddenly going to be in a boss fight with a ninja in the main story with the was it Oda? When we did the parade mission, there was that big boss fight where you definitely just have to fight that guy, and it seems like you probably just have to fight this Atom Smasher at the end. It's like those kind of moments are like, you took your big game and you made it small. You shrunk the mechanic options down to like a really narrow way. And there should have been so many more like choices in this game that I really had to think about, and man, what a dilemma. Like they were surprisingly rare in a setting that seems inherently like it would make you conflicted in so many different ways. There just weren't that many big choices where I'm like, I don't know, what am I gonna do? Oh man, what a hard choice. And in many cases you do this by having a series of a large cast of characters that you care about, and those characters are at odds with each other in some way. They're members of different factions or something, and this will do this for that faction and that for that faction. Like, this is a thing that games get on a really basic level. Like Elex is a game that had so many problems, but they at least understood the idea that they should introduce a party member that is from each different faction and have their interests be at odds with each other, and then you have to make major choices that will help this faction and fuck over that faction and so on. And that game had so many problems, so it didn't really pay off that stuff that well, because among other things, you just didn't care about the characters that much and so on. But at least they understood the idea there. In Wasteland 3, you have to make a major choice, and that's gonna, like, some of your characters are going to probably try to kill you, or you'll have to kill them if you make this choice or that choice, like, because they're just so, that choice is so all or nothing. Like, these characters or those characters cannot accept you making that choice, and they will leave your party or they will attack you. Dragon Age does this, Mass Effect does this. So many games understand the idea of that, and it's like, that's one of the ways you add weight to these choices. I almost never had choices that were going to affect the people around me. So there just wasn't that much weight to almost any of them. But also there just wasn't that much of a moral dilemma as a concept in many cases. And so it just wasn't... it was so... so many of them... Because once again, so many of the stories were just like, this character wants revenge for this thing. So are you gonna help them? Or are you gonna like suddenly take the side of this way less developed character that they're taking revenge on, that you don't have and like in many cases you don't even get the chance to get the full story at all from that person. And it's just like they just don't go places. I'm just sitting here cooking this game in my head, and it just I keep seeing more weird missteps. Like, where were my dilemmas? Part of the problem is the game's so modular. Modular in a way that, like, one of the best ways to make a pull off an open, like any RPG really, is making it feel like a cohesive world where everyone exists together and they interact and they're at odds with each other. Like when Mass Effect 2 knows to acknowledge the fact, like, hey, you're putting these people on your ship. Like, you're gonna walk in sometimes and they're gonna be arguing about something and it might get heated and this might be a problem. You can't, or like in Dragon Age, like you can't just put Loghain and Alistair in your party like that. You think that's just gonna work? What the fuck do you think is gonna happen? Or like Jack and Miranda, like people are gonna interact with each other and there's gonna be choices you make that are mutually exclusive of like who it helps and who it hurts, and that might be an irreparable rift that you create in the process of that conflict. There are people that have their own things that they want to do and they might point a gun at you in the moment. Genophage. God, the number of fucking character conflicts you have with different people that you care about because of the genophage. Oh my goodness. Where was the stuff? And almost none of the characters you meet in this game interact with each other, or even know each other exist for the most part. They just don't know you. You encounter them in a completely modular... That's why I miss T-Bug and Jackie. T-Bug and Jackie and Dexter interacted with each other, and they were at odds with each other, and it was going somewhere. But then that story just ended, which it wasn't even a bad ending. That was like honestly, like the Arasaka heist is good. Like it's actually good. Like all of that story, that's like that's a movie right there. That story. But then the game goes on for like 50 hours after that, and it never does it. It never can recapture that. And so even when I'm grouping up with my Aldecaldo's bros that have technically had more screen time, I think at that point, it never feels that. It never, like Mitch and Saul. They're never like Jackie and Dexter. Dexter was the one who had the least screen time, and he's still like, I had like, here's his motivations, here's what kind of person this guy is, here's how this is gonna go. And like Jackie and sorry, not Jackie, like Mitch and Saul, especially Saul, are just they're kind of boring. And it's just the love wasn't there in the same way. Maybe because they were optional. The entire ending was optional. They tried though in that ending. Like that ending was pretty solid, honestly. Like that, once I got past the point of no return, suddenly the game was better again. In a lot of ways. And seeing how good the game was before and after the open world, while still not being incredible, it was so much better than the entire open world middle part of the game that I can't help but think it's easy to see the mistake that was made here. And we had this again. We had this with Mass Effect Andromeda as well, where in Mass Effect Andromeda, we had that demo mission. There was like the vertical slice mission. It's the loyalty mission for that one dude in your party, the human guy, I don't remember their names anymore, but like his loyalty mission was suddenly this like well-paced level with like proper level design and verticality in a game. Like that game had platforming and jetpacks, and suddenly there was an actual level that remembered that and had verticality to it, and it had like comic timing and well written and well animated and well paced cutscenes, and it was fun, and it was like, oh my goodness, I'm suddenly playing like some of the wacky shit, like the fucking weird spy mission from the Citadel DLC of Mass Effect 3, where it's like, oh, look at this weird, funny, stupid adventure we're going on. Like, that mission was something like that. But no moment of the rest of Mass Effect Andromeda felt like that, or sounded like that, or anything like that. And it was just like, What? It's like you get these glimpses of what the game could have been if it was fundamentally different, because Mass Effect Andromeda was also this pointless open world that just was a waste of time. The open world didn't add to the game. It was just a big stupid splotch of map that you ran that let you approach every encounter from any direction, so no encounter could have meaningful level design, and you just shot dudes in an open field, but sometimes the open field's purple and sometimes the open field's acid. And it's like, cool, wow. But it's just like open worlds are, they're often just like the antithesis of level design. God, I hope Elden Ring is good. Please. I'm just thinking about that. The next From Software game is going to be open world, and this is where many of my favorite studios suddenly make a trash game. I'm hoping it's good. They're thoughtful. They're thoughtful. They try really hard. So I'm hoping that Elden Ring is another game I can put alongside Breath of the Wild and Pathologic 2 of actually using the concept of an open world to make a good game instead of just putting it there on the table and doing nothing with it like Andromeda and Cyberpunk did. This was really long. I guess I'll make this a podcast. I guess you guys already know that, because it probably made it a podcast. I'll put a little disclaimer at the beginning or something explaining the context of it, because this is too long to put at the end of the finale. So I'll make it its own video. Little standalone podcast. Why not? Why not? Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Like always, I get to play something new now. That's always something to look forward to. On to the next adventure. Always hoping for the best, but prepared for the worst.